This is Walter Sapatochny. It is January 14th. I'm with the 28th Division Association Oral History Program, and I'm here with Lieutenant Colonel Guy Smith, the Knowledge Management Officer with the 28th Infantry Division. Sir, thank you so much for your willingness to come in and talk with us a little bit today about your story. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here and hope this is helpful to future researchers.
Well, let's get started. Let's start with some biographical details. Where were you born?
I was born in Morton, Texas.
Okay. And what were your parents or siblings feeling about you joining the service?
Well, like a lot of people that join the Army, I kind of had a rougher family background. My father wasn't really around. I was raised by a single mother. Uh, because it was kind of a hard scrape life for us early in my life, she certainly understood the financial benefits. Some of her brothers had been drafted and gone to Vietnam, so she was a little nervous about the whole military idea, but she certainly understood it was a practical way for me to improve myself in our situation. And then as my career went on, she has become very proud and very supportive of my service.
Okay. What primary or secondary schools or college did you attend, if any, before you started your
Uh,
military service?
I was able to graduate Odessa High School in Odessa, Texas, which was while I was born in Morton. I basically grew up in Odessa. From Odessa, I went to Angelo State University in San Angelo, Texas, where I got a bachelor's of arts in political science.
And then were you in the ROTC program or did you join the military after that?
I was not. So I did have a scholarship my freshman year at Angelo State. Well, I had several scholarships. Wasn't the best student. Wasn't very disciplined. I cared a little more about football and dancing, probably chasing girls, than I did about my studies. So that was 1991. Uh, at the end of that semester, I figured I needed to do something to kind of grow up. The Gulf War had just concluded. So I dropped out of college for not even quite a year. I basically missed a semester. Uh, Joined the Texas Army National Guard as an armor crewman, uh, and then came back and resumed my studies. My source of commissioning, we'll say here, is Officer Candidate School. So I was Private Smith uh, through my sophomore through senior years in college.
Okay. Uh, what type of jobs did you have before you entered the military?
So before I joined the military, yeah, I had the basic uh, labor type jobs. My grandfather was a rancher, so pretty much every holiday, or school break, my mom would send me there, and I'd help him and some of his neighbors. As I got a little older and was capable of doing more, Odessa's obviously the oil field, so I did some general labor out in the oil field because it paid pretty well. Got a decent job as a working for a scoutmaster. Believe it or not, had a HVAC company he hired me on, and I did that in the summers through college. And probably the best job I ever had was I am an Eagle Scout. Scouting was a big part about getting me right as a kid. I was a camp counselor at Philmont Scout Ranch.
Okay, sounds good.
Definitely some
Uh,
skills helped me in the Army. Those first couple of field problems, at least I didn't have to worry about how to be in the woods.
yeah, you know how to read a compass, right?
I certainly did.
You joined the military. You said you were in armor, so you're on active duty for how long? Tell us a little bit about that period.
Yeah, my active duty period was relatively short. Like I said, I enlisted in November, so just as the war was wrapping up. No, I mean my actual enlistment date is 26 November 1991. Uh, when I went to basic training, uh, obviously the Gulf War spurred a lot of things. Uh, they thought we might still need to go back up. So I actually had orders that never had it for the 46th Replacement Battalion in Kuwait. They decided no, that wasn't necessary. They actually had sent me to Fort Knox to be an M60 crewman. Uh, Decided nope, you need the Texas National Guard is going to get M1s. All the guards getting M1, so I stayed for 19 kilos. So my time at Fort Knox was a little longer than a standard basic training, but long story short, got through all the training, became an Abrams armor crewman, and ended up basically just missing the spring college semester in the summer. and I was able to be back for school in February excuse me, in the fall semester, and resumed my studies at Angelo State. So it really wasn't active duty that first stint all that terribly long.
Is there any particular instructor during your period of active duty that stands out in your mind? And if so, why?
Yeah, absolutely. My drill sergeant really comes to mind. One, nobody ever forgets their drill sergeants, but my assistant drill sergeant, he and I crossed paths uh, two more times. When I came back as an armor for the armor basic course as a second lieutenant. Well, I met him first as Staff Sergeant Leroy Butler. He was the assistant drill sergeant for Private Smith during OSET. I came back as Second Lieutenant Smith for the Armor Basic course. He was Sergeant First Class uh, Butler, and he was one of the tank crew instructors for second lieutenants. And then when I came back again, he and I were just must have been on the same rotation for my. I was able to do the active duty Captain's Advanced course. He was one of our gunnery instructors. So it was one. He just. I mean, it's very. I think it's pretty rare to have one NCO teach you in three different schools and three different roles, and how our relationship changed. I always appreciated the consistency of his message, regardless of what my role was, and his professionalism as it changed from him being my NCO to being an officer that an NCO was preparing. I always thought that put me in good stead for understanding the officer NCO dynamic.
Okay. Is there any negative part of that training that you can think of? Any bad times?
Um, yeah, I guess of just general Army training or one of the in those three courses. Just make sure I understand.
Well, maybe general Army training in
Yeah,
that.
well, I think one of the things the Army does training very well. I mean, it's what we do. Army is a people business, and people need to be trained. Uh, but one thing I think we've missed the boat on, and obviously my career very closely corresponds with the global war on terrorism. It was a huge part of my military career. Uh, as the Guard went from being a strategic reserve to an operational force, and we were consistently going on to Title 10 for mobilizations, it comes from a very good place. The Army wants to train you on how to put you back into civilian life, but the Army doesn't understand what civilian life is like. And they've come up with these mandatory courses that I've gone through 5 times because I've mobilized 5 times and come back 5 times. Uh, I can say they've improved a little, but not nearly enough. It's just a waste of time, and I see it just kills the morale of guardsmen. It comes from a good place, but yeah, those mandatory classes that they make guardsmen take to come off of active duty feel almost like punishment and that you're still a second class citizen.
Hmm. Interesting. How did you become a member of the 28th Infantry Division?
Well, that's actually kind of a funny story. So my very first deployment was the Texas Army National Guard was the 49th at that time. They weren't back to being the 36th as they are today, and it was kind of a big deal. So the 49th partnered with the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment to go to Bosnia, and like I said, that was Stabilization Force 7 was that mobilization. Uh, it was one of the earlier deployments for the Guard. This is obviously pre 2001 and September 11th, uh, where they basically totally mixed the units. If a section had a 3rd ACR OIC, it had a 49th NCOIC, or vice versa. If it was a 49th OIC, it had a 3rd ACR NCOIC. Uh, I was assigned to a specialty staff section uh, called the it was called the Joint Military Commission at that time. It evolved into the Joint Military Affairs. Basically, it was the part of the staff that interacted directly with the Bosnian Army and monitored their compliance with the instruction to parties, what brought that war to an end. The '06, who was active duty that I worked for, uh, was a great mentor to me. I really helped me to learn how to be an officer in a deployed environment. So after the deployment, he ended up going to First Army as a senior trainer, and one of his very first assignments was to be the senior trainer for the 28th ID, as 28th ID was preparing for Stabilization Force 12, S412. Uh, he reached out and he thought, that having a guard perspective on his training team would be helpful to the 28th ID. So he reached out to me and a couple of others in Texas and said, would you be willing to come on orders for some of the major training exercises and events and help me train the 28th ID? I said, sure, sir. Happy to come up to Pennsylvania. Through the course of that training, bonded reasonably well with the members of the 28th team. There was a slot that they were having trouble filling. I think it's probably because nobody knew what it was and didn't know what a good job it was. So at the end of the training, they're like, hey, would you just do the job? I was like, sure. I was young, I was single. So I was like, I deployed again to S412 with the 28th, and just that's how it all started.
So then you transitioned to the 28th.
I did.
What specialized training, if any, did you receive when you came with the 28th? Anything different than what you'd already done?
Uh, yeah. So the 28th has been, up until my time with the 28th, I was very much the typical, young officer. I was armor and cavalry. I had the very typical courses. But while I was an M day with the 28th for a while, that's where I became an AGR, and have had an opportunity to pick up a couple of specialized trainings. I'm a Delta 7 Alpha, which is defense support to civil authorities. I picked that up because I was at the Joint Force Headquarters J35 for the World Meeting of Families National Special Security event where Pope Francis came to Philadelphia. I also was put on a path by a 28th ID Chief of Staff, Colonel Ferraro. He realized that knowledge management was uh, relatively a relatively new field, and he saw that was the future with all the different mission command systems that are in a division talk. So he sent me for what's called One Echo knowledge management, and then the companion to that is once I became a field grade and I went from being an armor officer to a functional area 57, which is simulation and operations. So that's probably the specialty training that I've received since I've become a member of the 28th.
Were any of those specialized trainings relatively difficult?
Um, I would say the difficulty is it's really technical. Uh, those courses are taught at an active duty level, and the really hard part was how to bring them back because while it's gotten better in my time in the military, we're always a couple of upgrades behind our active duty counterparts. So what you train on is not what you get when you return to home station, but you still got to apply those principles and prepare the unit for what's ahead. So the courses themselves, yeah, I didn't find them particularly challenging, like from an academic sense, just hard work and dedication, like most Army courses. If you put your effort into it, you'll do fine. It was application of those skill sets with an M-Day force that was a couple of iterations behind on the technology.
What was the hardest part of your military lifestyle for you to adapt to, do you think?
Probably the hardest part. I mean, the I've taken to the military lifestyle uh, pretty well. Uh, Once I got a family, being away so much, uh, the long hours, the mobilizations, that was probably the hardest part for me was being away from them.
What would you say would be the easiest part of the military lifestyle for you to adapt to, that you had to adapt to?
I took to the the standards and the culture of accountability. That really spoke to me even from the very beginning. It was part of what I was seeking, I think, when I joined the military at 19. Uh, so that was probably the easiest for me to go into. Being process oriented, clear standards, culture of accountability. Uh, the Army values have always really spoke to me and something I try to emulate, not just when I'm in uniform, but all the time. Uh, and actually, that's probably one of my concerns as I prepare to leave the military, is it does seem like maybe we've taken a bit of a step back in that since COVID.
You mentioned numerous deployments. to combat zones. What are your recollections of those deployments? And you can talk about all, you can talk about some of them, whatever you're comfortable with.
Um, well, I know one of the things is, what's a funny thing from a deployment, and probably well, I'll go in order. So that very first deployment, S-47, was uh, I really recall the active component National Guard integration and how it's like any other relationship. Both sides just don't know what the other side's like, and then when you mix them in that army mill and you go through the process, once you gain knowledge of each other, you understand and you work better. So seeing how AC and National Guard can knit together very well, it's certainly possible. uh S412 with the 28th, that was kind of the same thing but a different culture shock, taking a kid from West Texas and putting him with a bunch of Pennsylvanians. uh that was that was a challenge for me, but I do particularly remember on that deployment. By that point in time, the local military uh, was trying to do the right thing. Obviously, that if you're familiar at all with that conflict, there was landmines everywhere. They had a lot of old munitions, often dating all the way back to World War II. They had not been stored. So while I can honestly say during S412, I never felt like anybody was intentionally trying to do me harm. I will always say that that was the deployment where my physical person was in the most danger. Again, not because of ill intent by an opponent, but because of the environment. Two things come to mind that from that deployment. One shows the danger. Uh, One of their local officers was honestly trying to show us where a weapons cache was so that we could get it cleaned up and taken care of. And as we were walking through the snow, watching him just freeze because he realized we'd walked into a minefield. So that was a pretty scary. He was leading again, no intent to do us harm. He was in more danger than we were, but trying to back out of a minefield. You remember, the old joke is like, how long do you have to get out of a minefield? The rest of your life. I will always remember that one because it's true. Nobody's in a hurry. You make sure you come out exactly the way you came in. And then another one is so disposing of all of those munitions causes challenges. Like there's blast radiuses, there's safety zones. I mean, you don't just go blow up all these munitions. So, normally the military's general order number one, no drinking while you're on deployment. But because of my position as an LNO and interacting with them daily, I was granted a waiver. They had a local unit, the 55th Recon, known as the Drina Wolves, who were their reputation was not good. If you Google them, I'm sure you'll see some of the uh, war crime type things that they were accused of, but they were keen to change that reputation. A lot of those members, or if not all, had moved on and they wanted to do something positive, but it's a different culture. So they wanted to negotiate how one of their ranges could be modified to be uh, a weapons destruction area, and they did that over a local plum brandy. Well, I wasn't that big a drinker. I hadn't drank at all because we were about mid deployment. Uh, all I really remember is First Sergeant Urban, my NCOIC, pouring, like other than starting to, I had my negotiation points. I knew what we were trying to get. We were trying to get a demo range. Uh, so I start off with this plum brandy. I remember him kind of pouring me back into the vehicle. But long story short, we got everything we wanted and then some. The range turned out to be a fantastic way. We got rid of literally tons of munitions and made the place safer. So that's a little funny how drinking can lead to a good thing. You don't hear that very often on a deployment. And then probably moving on to Iraq, the thing that sticks with me is I did 50 combat patrols in Iraq. The crew I went with the most, so funny. Uh, every time they came back in the wire, they played Womanizer by Britney Spears as loud as they could turn it up on our strikers. And for some reason, that just always stuck with me as funny. And it shows how soldiers can detach so quickly from the concerns of a combat zone to just being American young men thinking American young men thoughts. So yeah, that's probably there. And then as I matured and came into the two deployments as the knowledge management officer, in Kuwait with the 28th ID headquarters in 2018 and 2022, it became much more, I wasn't the guy on the line anymore, but realizing that at that point in your career, you do the things to make it a little bit easier to all those soldiers that are still out there on the line to do their jobs and to come home with 10 fingers and 10 toes. So hope that wasn't too long, but kind of walks you through the five deployments.
Yeah, yeah, no, not long at all. What did you do for recreation when you were deployed? I know it probably changed by deployment, but typically, what would you do? What would the soldiers do besides
Uh,
playing live music on the Strikers?
yeah, it's amazing. Video games and movies were always a hit, but I've always kind of struggled with my weight. Uh, so yeah, I'm a stress eater, like some people are. So for me, it was about physical fitness, which because it was just multiple benefits. One, it relieves the stress, gets you those positive endorphins. It keeps you fit for the mission. I'm probably gonna, butcher this quote, but I think Patton said something along the lines of there are no tired units, there's only tired leaders. So, being physically fit and always able to lead that mission, uh, you're just more confident as a leader when you're fit and you're able to say, follow me and be out front. So for me, uh, I probably got more fit on every one of my deployments. So that was a big part of it. And then once I had a spouse, and this is a tip I give every young soldier in their first deployment, is my wife would find something that we hadn't watched, some sort of TV series. She'd ship me the DVDs. She'd have a set here, and we would watch that because so often you can't really discuss your day to day because of operational concerns. But we'd watch the series together, and that'd give us something to communicate so we could stay somewhat bonded.
Some of the soldiers that I've interviewed in the past have told me that they did certain things for good luck. Some people would carry a certain talisman. People would do other things. Some pilots would rub the nose of the airplane before they got in it. Is there anything you did for good luck?
I'm not really very superstitious. I've always been one of the people that believed luck follows the prepared. But I am in the Order of St. George. I did earn my spurs, so I do wear on my ID tags. I do wear the Order of St. George. So I guess I do that for luck. But this may sound silly, but it's true. Before I did a patrol, what I did for luck was make sure my weapon was clean and functional, and that I read and reviewed the operations order, so I knew exactly what our task and purpose was when we left the wire.
Yeah,
Yeah, so not particularly superstitious, more like luck follows the prepared.
sure, sure. What do you think was the best part of your service experience overall?
Yeah, I had to think about that one for a while, but I think what it really comes to me is the consistency of always being a soldier. So that gave you that, like, you're always in the army, you always got a career. So it gave you that fiscal, again, coming from a lower socioeconomic situation, that financial security. But at the same time, the army always wants you to change. There's new, like I said, there's new functional areas, there's new ASIs, there's the new responsibilities of rank, there's new missions. So I really appreciated that you were always in the army, you were always a soldier, but there was also always a new challenge, a new mission, new responsibilities to correspond with your new rank. So for me, that was probably the best part of always being the same, but always having a new challenge.
Well, you're still in service up until the end of the month here, so I'm not going to get into did you join veterans organizations or things like that yet. But maybe next time we get together for an interview, we can talk about that piece of it. But I am interested, though, in your feelings about how your military experience has affected your life.
Yeah, I know you probably interview a fair number of traditional guardsmen, and it's a huge part of their lives, I'm sure. But having been AGR for 20 plus years, it's I can kind of compare and contrast it to my time as an MDay versus my AGR. It stops being what you do and it becomes who you are. And the reason I say that is I think to be an effective leader, you always have to be the same person. You have to be true to yourself and you have to be the same, whether you're sitting in your office, you're sitting in a M1 tank commander's cupola, or you're riding a striker. You just always have to be the same. So it stops becoming your career and it becomes your vocation, almost a calling. So it does change your personality. uh, I recently found the personality test that they make you take at the Command and General Staff College. They said hold on to that, and I did. See how you drift back, uh, a year or so after service. So we'll see if that happens. But the other thing that it did is I would not have gotten well, you never know, but it's highly unlikely I would have gotten the degree, and I certainly would not have gotten the grades that I got if it wouldn't have been for the military. They installed that discipline, that appreciation, that work ethic. It has certainly provided and will continue to provide for me and my family as I'm fortunate enough to have a pension that will begin immediately. So that'll be good. And on a personal side, all the different trainings, sometimes you worry too much about like how does that specific thing go? Yeah, okay, that won't be there. But it's taught me that with focus, that you can that I have a skill set for problem solving that you can stay on. And I think that will go with me. And that the other part is that we've talked a couple times in this interview of how you've had to blend because the Army brings people from all walks of life, multiple different ages where generally there's three generations in the Army at any given time that you're trying to communicate to. So I think it's really taught me to not have preconceived notions about people, to look at them, as they present and base my judgments on their actions, not their religion, their decree, their physical appearance. Look at their actions and their performance and base your decisions on them on that, which I think is a good thing to help us get past some of the other more divisive things in our society.
How do you think your military service affected your family?
Yeah. I didn't write this in my pre notes, but so my wife has taken in the last few years of referring to the Army as my needy teenage girlfriend. It's always about me, me, me. So I think that was her very polite and loving way. I've been blessed with a very supportive spouse. Of the Army has just always had to come first, and I have missed not just the days with all those deployments overseas, but it's not just the deployments, it's all the drill weekends, it's the war fighters, it's the train ups. Yeah, I couldn't even begin to tell you, and I really don't think I'd want to know the number because I couldn't bear the guilt of how many family birthdays and anniversaries and things of that I have missed. Now, again, I'm blessed with a loving and supportive family, and well, I won't say they never complain, but they never judge me for it, and they always support me. But yeah, it has had a negative effect, and I have seen it's hard on marriages. I've seen a lot of very dear friends lose their marriages and their family over military service.
What are some life lessons you've learned from your military service that maybe you'd like to pass on to young soldiers?
Um, Probably the biggest one. You pick up on a couple of quotes here and there. Uh, Defeat is not as fatal as victory, uh, and what I think that means, who knows what the original author thinks it means, is when you're defeated, it just means something didn't work. If you look at it critically, you analyze it, you apply those lessons, and you go get better. Very seldom does a defeat end whatever it is you're trying to do, whether it be a mistake in your career that you need to overcome, whether it be something on the operational field, uh, you can get better. Victory can be fatal because if you can become there can be a certain degree of hubris from that makes you stale, that makes you stop learning, and then that's how you get caught off guard and your adversary or whatever you're trying to achieve can deal you a blow that you can't recover from. So the defeat is not as fatal as victory, and that work ethic and a willingness to learn can outperform talent or will outperform talent almost every time.
One more question, if I may.
Sure.
What was the one question you wish I would have asked but didn't?
Wow. I didn't even think about that one. Is
It wasn't in your pre-notes.
Yeah, it wasn't in my pre-notes because as you can tell, I hope you can see that my answers reflects the kind of person I am. I do my homework, I prepare. Um, I think the maybe a question worth considering is, you know, was it worth it?
Yeah.
Uh,
Was it worth it?
how you do the benefits outweigh the cost? And I'm struggling with that right now. I really am. Uh, Before we began the interview, you were kind enough to talk to me a little bit, and I'm in a position where I can take 6 months off before finding my second career post Army to kind of see what that to do that self assessment, to see if the aches and pains that often manifest in a VA claim, if the time lost with family, if it was all worth it. And I think it's a question worth pondering. I plan on spending the next 6 months trying to answer that. I think to stay positive and go forward, it's going to be a yes. Uh, it may sound trite, maybe it is that leftover Boy Scout in me, but yes, I joined for the college money. There's no doubt about that. Yes, I kind of gutted out the last couple of years for a very generous retirement, but I don't think you stay for the 33 years. I think when it's all said and done, as they prepped out my final DD 214, it'll be 33 years, 3 months, and 7 days. Somewhere in there, I still believe that this is the best country in the world. It has its flaws. One of them being I don't think people appreciate just how good we have it. Uh, that yes, the price that me and my fellow soldiers have paid, I would like to say for most of it, it was worth it. But I think there's going to be a caveat only if our society continues to strive to to the proverbial better angels, to be the country that we're certainly capable of being.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel Smith, I want to thank you again very much for taking the time to share a little bit about your story. Fascinating story. And we really appreciate you coming in and your willingness to do this.
Thank you. Appreciate it.